glad you're here. So today we have Fe Anam Avis back with us again, author of Peak. And we met once before to talk about the phenomenon of estrangement and what that looks like. And Fe's here today to tell us about the Peak program. But before you start in with that, Fe, can you talk a little bit about the demographics of estranged parents? Who are we talking about being involved in Peak?
It's an important question you raise, Kelly, about the demographics. We see the onset of estrangement generally in the late 50s, at least from adult children. And so we're talking about parents experiencing estrangement, generally approaching 60 years old, 70 years old, even 80 years old. And that is a stage of life where there are other significant things taking place. For example, retirement. People are retiring from their jobs, and so they are experiencing that as a loss. The data shows that men don't do as well with retirement as women in terms of maintaining some kind of relationships and connections. It becomes a higher risk, time of risk for them in terms of suicide, for example. It's also a time when there are other kinds of losses. Parents often begin to become ill, need additional caregiving, or die, pass. There's a loss of parents. Sometimes there's a loss of siblings. I lost my sister when I was 66 years old. She was killed. There's changes in health that are beginning to take place as you age. So there are a number of losses that parents are having to deal with at the same time that they are experiencing this estrangement. In addition to that, it's a life stage when a person named Erickson talked about this is a time of life when you begin to look back on your life and ask, what did my life mean? And if you come up with an answer to that this is what it meant, my life was meaningful, then that bodes well for you in terms of facing those last years of life and doing so with a sense of happiness and engagement. If you can't answer that question, then it leads to what Erickson called despair.
Yeah.
I think for many estranged parents, their identity is really wrapped up largely in their children. They put a lot of time, sometimes money, into raising their children. And so when they're trying to answer that question, what did it mean? And they experience that their children are no longer in relationship with them, it begins to make them wonder, what did life mean? And so instead of kind of moving into this sense of integrity and hope and positive engagement with life in that final chapter, they end up feeling despair. So that's really an important question. What are the demographics of the people impacted by estrangement?
It's an interesting, when you look at the Ericksonian point of view on that, because so many times part of the conversation I have with estranged parents is the question about integrity. I'm sorry, not integrity, legacy.
Yes.
What am I leaving behind? How will I be remembered? And that impacts so many other decisions that they have to make at the end of life, because they're thinking, how do I want to be remembered? That's a really interesting set of demographics. Thanks for clarifying. So your movement, I guess, is what we'll call it, right? Movement Peak.
Right.
Tell me a little bit more about that. What's its mission? What, the acronym again, and kind of fill me in on that part of it.
So PEAK is an acronym. It stands for Parents of Estranged Adult Kids. The mission of PEAK is to support estranged parents of adult children through resources that foster their recovery, the kind of things we've been talking about, from all those multiple impacts of estrangement, the emotional, the mental, the physical, the relational, the spiritual, all of those impacts to support parents. And that has, as it's developed, has actually evolved into three components. Originally, the first part was just writing a book. Again, based a lot on the research, because I didn't have that much contact, in fact, virtually zero, with anyone who was estranged at the beginning. So I did all this research and wrote the book out of the research that I was learning. Well, then the question was, with the book, does this help anyone?
So what, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. So what? And so I kind of, with some fear and trepidation and hopefully love and compassion, announced in the community that I was starting a support group for parents of estranged adult kids. And we had about 15 people at the meeting, and we read the book every week and shared, and lo and behold, discovered it did indeed have a positive impact upon people's lives. So support groups of various kinds is a part of what Peak does, built around resources that Peak is developing, books that have been written, and there's digital media, social media. I know, Kelly, you're working on a book that I'm really looking forward to, and then training professionals to better equip them to know how to address the kind of relatively unique needs of estranged parents. So therapists, leaders in faith communities, chaplains, estate attorneys, financial planners, physicians, people, life care planners who help folks in their later years kind of know what they need in terms, can they be in independent living? Do they need to be in assisted living? These are all folks that tend to be front line. These are people that are often dealing with older adults, and therefore a percentage of them are going to be estranged parents. So training them to know how to better do that helping work that they are engaged in.
Mm-hmm. So that would mean that each of those different disciplines would benefit from knowing about this situation, and so they can better handle it or have answers for people who might come in, or even to be able to ask that question right up front so they know what they're dealing with when they have, say, a lawyer has someone coming in to write a will. There's certain questions that keep popping up around that. I would imagine that if they sort of had a heads up, if the lawyer had a heads up, they would be able to know right away, okay, there's some questions here that I'm going to be asked, or that I should inform these people about, saving a whole lot of trouble in that office at that moment, as with any planner you're working with. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that was one of the early kind of learnings for me from folks that were in the first couple of support groups, is that we had folks in these various professions. I had a person who was a life care planner, and working, as I said, with older adults, trying to determine what kind of care do they need. Do they need skilled nursing? Do they need somebody coming into the home, independent living, assisted living? And she said to me, I would estimate, I'm quoting her, I would estimate that half of the clients I deal with have an estranged child.
Half.
Half. And then she connected me to a financial planner, also a part of a Peak group. And he said this is a huge issue, and it becomes such a big issue because there's a delay in talking about it, as you suggested, Kelly. And so he said we get all the way through this planning process, and all of a sudden I discovered this that there is this major issue that has an impact on their lives, and we haven't talked about it. And so he asked me actually to meet with a group of financial planners to talk with them about parental estrangement. And so, yes, it affects the way that many of these professions that their goal is to help people deal with a whole range of issues. Part of it is if they can just get that out as soon as possible in the conversation, normalize it, let people know, this happens. The financial planner, he makes this now part of his kind of screening at the beginning.
Yeah.
He asks questions so he doesn't have to put the burden on them of bringing it up.
Yes.
I got a kind of emotional speed bump when you have to bring up something. If somebody else brings it up and says, this is happening to a lot of people, it normalizes it. So yes, a lot of different professions are affected, and by knowing it, they can do a better job.
Wonderful. Well, you're talking about so many resources that are out there that a parent would tap into, needing to be informed. But you also talked about one of your components. I'm just checking here. You were talking about resources. So I would think that resources would include friends and non-estranged family. What do they need to know, or are they helping? Are they not helping? What do you know about that part of the life of a parent who's been estranged?
Yeah, I think we all have relationships with people that they care about us, and they're trying to do the best that they can. Whether you're talking about your pastor or you're talking about a family member, but because they haven't had the experience or don't have much knowledge about it, they sometimes give advice that is problematic. One of the things that I think we've kind of learned in Peak is that we really need to respect the boundaries that adult children set. And if they say, I need not to have contact with you, then we need to respect that, as a boundary. But sometimes the advice that people give is to not honor that boundary. You should just go pound on their door. You should just go sit on their porch.
Yes.
And not leave. And so there is advice sometimes that's given. I think that there's in speaking from the standpoint of a former pastor, I think a lot of emphasis on reconciliation and the process of reconciliation, understandably so. We reconcile with God, and then God enables us to reconcile with one another. But I think as a faith community, we sometimes make that such an expectation that we don't help people know, how do you live if you don't have power, to change it all? How do you live in that estrangement and find a way to be okay? Sometimes the sole focus on estrangement, I think sometimes on reconciliation, I think sometimes the expectation that parents bear the full responsibility for mending the break,
Yes.
Becomes an issue because, as we talked about earlier in the question you raised about demographics, we're often talking about parents that are no longer, that what seemed like omnipotent parent when we were 5 years old or 10 years old and should be able to handle everything and do everything.
Yeah.
talking about we're talking about people. And I think as we age, I have experienced this. My parents become persons. And so to expect them to be able to handle kind of all of this and to take all of the responsibility, make them what I call the eternal parent,
Yeah.
is sometimes problematic. Feeling the need to take sides.
Yes.
It's not an issue of finding someone to blame. It doesn't matter. I say everybody deserves recovery.
Yes.
Children, adult children. I mean, if they have estranged their parent, they have done that for a reason,
Yes.
and they are hurting too. We don't have to judge those reasons. All we need to be able to say is they are moving out of, they made these decisions as a response to things that have happened in their lives or that they perceive. And we have to respect that, as well as respect the fact that estranged parents are experiencing the pain that they are. And there's no need to take sides. It's not helpful to take sides usually, but that can be a problem too. I think neglecting the many and serious impacts of estrangement upon a parent. So if you go to, this is one of the experiences I have. You go to your doctor and you've got a physical problem. It's like, well, we're just going to treat the physical problem. We're not going to talk about, that this may be driven by things that are happening in your life.
Yes.
That are more emotional in nature. And so there's this extreme compartmentalization that estranged parents often have to deal with. And I've had personal experience with that.
Mm.
And I think also not recognizing the need for a holistic approach is kind of related to what I just said. I think one of the things I've discovered is there's no silver bullet.
No.
There's one answer. And you're going to need a number of things. And when anyone suggests that we're just going to give you a medication here and this will take care of it. Yes. I think many times estranged parents they can need some kind of medication, but golly, that can't be the whole answer, believe me.
No.
And so we need to help people realize, you're going to have to get more sunshine in your day. You're going to need more contact with the natural world.
Yeah.
You're going to need to journal. You're going to need to learn how to meditate and kind of calm down those mental processes. You're going to need friends that you can talk to. You may need a peak support group. You're going to need, to participate in healing services at your local church. I mean, there's a healing service at the local Episcopal church I've gone to every week. And every week when they ask, does anyone need healing? I'm forward at that altar asking for healing. So it's going to take, many of these different components for recovery. And I think when we are just looking for some one thing, or people are suggesting you only need this, I think that can sometimes throw us off track. So I think it's looking for people who can help us recognize we may have to deal with a number of different things, and there's no one thing.
Yes.
Take care of all of it.
That's one of the things that I work with the estranged parents who are working at getting back into life and life back into them, is identifying what is healthy for them. Where did they find joy? Where did they find peace? How did they do that before the estrangement? We need to maybe adapt it to the current situation, but that is such an important place for them to explore. Their spirituality, what does that do for them? Where do they find their peace in that? And how do we adapt that? So yeah, there's there's so much to be said for um, regeneration and taking a look at those things that were healthy before, and maybe we've just kind of left by the wayside. So
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and I don't know, what it's like for others always, but um, I've said a number of times, my instincts and intuitions are pretty good, maybe 80% of the time, but there's something I do that's really not good, and that is kind of instinctively, reflexively, probably is a better word, is when I'm in a lot of pain, I withdraw.
yes,
And that is the worst thing for me to do. But the impulse to do that is so powerful. So I think when you go through a trauma of some kind and you have a reflex of withdrawing, then the kinds of things that you've done before that were really important and helpful to you, you may have pulled back from. And you become kind of imprisoned by your own reflexes there to pull in. And I think helping remind people of the things you're talking about is really important, to kind of re-engage.
yes,
Very important, very important. Yeah.
yeah. So you mentioned when your litany there that one of the things that might be helpful are peak groups, and we haven't said anything yet about the peak groups. So I'm wondering, I mean, we kind of know what groups are. We have different images in our mind of what a group of any sort might engage in. So I'm curious if you want to share what might someone experience, or what might it be like if somebody would join a peak group?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. First, I have to say, I'm always impressed by the courage of people.
Ah,
To attend a peak group for the first time is an incredible act of courage, a
yes.
beautiful act of courage, because they've either probably not talked much about it, or they've tried to talk about it, and it's not worked out well for them. And so to step into an actual group, either physically, pre-COVID, or to do one online, is a incredible act of courage. And I can't help but when I look at them, to not look at them with great admiration. Uh, so I think, and that's certainly what I hope people feel when they step into a peak support group, is that this is a place where they are really welcomed, and we acknowledge that they've taken a big step, and they hopefully can pat themselves on the back for that. But I think, in all honesty, it's a little awkward at first. I think it is a new experience for people, folks who've never been in any setting like that before. I've been in small groups for decades.
Mm,
I'm old. So I've had lots of experience in small groups. But for some people, it's the very first experience they've had. And so it feels a little awkward. They wonder what's going to happen. We're always afraid. Are we going to be embarrassed? Somebody going to try and tell us what to do? Are we going to lose? Do we have any sense of control? Are we going to lose all sense of control coming into this group? So there's awkwardness at first, but I think that dissipates pretty quickly. There's a standard process we go through in these first time groups, where we read a list of common experiences. This is what we're experiencing. We feel we're in this cycle of kind of people talking to us and not talking to us. We feel confused. We feel angry. We wonder if there's something really wrong with us. We act crazy sometimes. All things. And I'll tell you, Kelly, one of the things that impresses me at the beginning the most is when people would read through that list at the beginning, they would often kind of they'd choke up. And because it's like, at last, someone knows my story.
Yeah.
This is my story. And they hear their story being told. And so I think that pretty quickly gives them a sense of, I'm okay here.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's a part of that experience is a kind of discovery of facts, just factual information.
Mm.
Like it was for me. It's like, wow, there's a lot of other folks that are going through this. I'm not alone. Most of the time it happens that the children take the initiative for the break. There's just getting some initial information that is really helpful to them. And they get that out of reading the Peak book, but also exploring then different ideas, like about the parent-adult-child relationship. We have certain ideas about that and what that should look like. And is that the case? You talked about legacy. There's a tendency to see our legacy through the eyes of how our children feel about us. And we may be neglecting the fact that our children are doing fine and they're making real contributions to the world, and that also is a legacy, but we have to shift our thinking.
Yes.
Our legacy is not how they feel about us alone. Our legacy is also, who are they? What are they contributing to the world in their own ways? Everybody makes some contribution. And what does that look like? So it's exploring different ways of thinking. We say that we are the biological instruments of our child's existence, but their true parent is a spiritual source. Well, that's a really different way of looking.
It sure is.
And it may sound a little woo-wooey to people, and I can understand that. And yet, I found that understanding is really, important to explore. So it's about facts, but it's also about perspectives and how we think about ourselves and our children. And are there some different ways of thinking about that may be better ways for us in terms of our recovery? So I think people go through that experience, and it challenges them sometimes. There's one of the things I really appreciate is when people can just be gut level honest about the book I've written with me and the group. And I've had people say, I hate this book. I want to throw this book against a wall. I get that, because it's challenging kind of the ways we think in some ways that can help us hopefully come to a different way of perceiving things. And that initial kind of honest reaction is exactly what people need sometime, I think, as they kind of work through that. So I think they feel through kind of looking through a different lens. They feel empowered. This sense of powerlessness that just is overwhelming. I can't do anything about this. Yes, but you can do something about you. That you can recover, and it's small steps. It's one step at a time, but with perseverance, you can recover. And so I think we watch people go through that kind of evolution of awkwardness, and then, wow, here my story is being told here. I'm not alone. Discovering information, looking at different ways of perceiving what's happening to them, and then a sense of empowerment. That's kind of what I watch happen in the weeks.
Yeah. Well, so then what changes do you see? They have all of this experience, and let me know, like, how many groups does someone go to, or how long are these? And you want them to see change. So what sort of change do you see during, or maybe, through the work of this group?
Yeah. I think the first change is just being able to just say it. I've not really thought about that part of it until just now. But, one of the things we do, as you know, Kelly, in the groups is we introduce ourselves, and we always introduce ourselves with our name and by saying, I'm an estranged parent. And just being able to say it and to say that with other people and knowing that you're safe and you kind of accept that about yourself and your situation. I think that right there is, I see that as a positive step. I see people over a period of time taking responsibility for their own well-being. The duration of the time, let me say a word about that. Generally, we study the book. We do a chapter or a portion of a chapter a week. So it can be 14 or 15 weeks that folks are together. It's a voluntary group, some people may come to the group for a period of time and get what they need out of the group, but most people, I think, benefit by staying with the group throughout the study of the entire book. I think we see folks taking responsibility for their own well-being. That's a process. I mean, there is a tendency at first to just talk about what my kids have done to me.
Yeah.
And to focus on that. And eventually, I think there's a shift where they slowly begin to see that I can't expect to be taken care of here. I have to take care and take responsibility for my own recovery process and my own well-being. And I think we start to see that shift. I think we start to see a shift in terms of just understanding what's going on. Kelly, you talk a lot about the lack of a co-created narrative. So we have parents and children that are dealing with two different stories around this, sometimes the same set of facts.
Yes.
And there is this frustration as a estranged parent of you want to do something, and but you find it keeps getting inserted into a different story. Now your story is, I love you. I'm doing this because I care about you. I want to reconnect, but that gets put into a different story, and you develop this sense of can't win. I lose no matter what I do. It's the kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Well, it's because you don't have the same story you're working out of. And when you understand that, then you can kind of think about it differently than, they're just stubborn and don't want to listen, but they have a different story from your story. And so I think understanding that is really helpful. Shifting from looking at, just looking at what's right or wrong with people to what's gone on in the relationship. As you talk about it, Kelly, it's not about defective people. It's about, a defective relationship. Something's gone wrong in the relationship. How can we talk about the relationship instead of talking about people? So I see that shift taking place in people. I see them honoring boundaries that their children have set. And sometimes you think, well, I'm just calling to say I'm sorry. Even that may not be, may be a violation of a boundary. Helping people honor and respect those boundaries. I see them being able to do that. I see folks identifying sources of meaning to their lives, that an identity that goes beyond I'm just a parent. Well, there's lots more to our lives than that, and helping people kind of look at more broadly who they are, what is their identity, and what are sources of meaning for their lives. Practicing self, doing things that will help them take care of themselves. It's really hard sometimes because you want to be a victim. And but again, as you pointed out, Kelly, when you are a victim, it really limits your options for moving forward, because you're totally dependent on somebody else changing. And it's like you're really stuck. And so you may not realize it, but by being the victim, you're really building your own prison. Mm-hmm. And I see parents, moving out of that and gaining a sense of, from my AA friends and my Al-Anon friends, serenity. It doesn't mean that they still don't hurt, that they still don't feel that estrangement, but it means there is a developing sense of serenity in which they're able to live in it and be okay, and not just be okay, but actually live with some zest. And so part of what we've posted on the website are just comments of people who've been through peak groups. They're anonymous, and I think that's really important. But there's lots of comments about how this has changed their lives. Yeah. I think we're seeing really positive results. So when I started, it's like, what's going to happen? I have no idea. I've been really grateful to discover that. I think it's really helpful to people.
So I would have to say, from the time I joined you, sort of watch how people progress through this, it's really inspiring to see the amount of effort people put in to the work, rather than just sitting in their sorrow, which there's a time for that as well.
Yes.
And I also feel like I want to add in at this moment just a caveat that says engaging in recovery is intentional, but it is not giving up hope. That
Right.
The work of recovery actually lays a groundwork for a more successful reconciliation when that opportunity comes. So we're not talking about giving up hope in order to intentionally become involved in recovery. And that, I think, is important for estranged parents to know, because who wants to give up hope on such an important relationship?
That's such an important point, and I'm glad you brought it up, because that is in fact something that I've observed as well. That as some of the members of our groups begin to work on, these different kinds of issues for themselves, become better versions of themselves, if you will.
Yes.
That they actually may begin to connect with their adult children, slowly, a step at a time, in ways that are more healthy and sustainable. And I really believe that the work of Peak was really foundational to them to be able to take those positive steps at reconnecting as that happens. So yeah, that's really an important point, and is also something that I've observed.
Yeah. It is kind of inspirational to watch people do the work, and to feel at the end of it, to see the changes that have happened for them. So I wanted to ask you, I'm going to circle back to part of our conversation. Geez, I can't even remember where we were talking about it. But the question that comes up in my mind is, you were talking about, when you run into people, what do you say? How do you say it? That sort of thing. But we also have those people who listen to us and understand the situation, or they're willing to sit with us at times. But how should estranged parents be speaking about their children, their adult children? Sometimes that feels very awkward, and they don't have language. Do you have any suggestions for that?
I think one of the things that we have to be discerning about as we're talking about estrangement with our adult children is, how do we do that in a way that doesn't create more damage? I mean, that's, first, do no harm,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So I really want to encourage estranged parents to be discerning, especially in an age of social media, where things get
Yes.
reposted, and then you lose control of them. So I really would encourage estranged parents not to post about their children or about any details about the relationship. The only time that we post anything that estranged parents have to say is, well, with their permission, of course, but with an anonymity, because we don't want, you know, the discovery that information about your personal relationship with your child, that especially anything that names them as well, we don't want that on social media. So
Yeah.
we want to encourage parents to refrain from communicating in any way that could be reproduced and be harmful to the relationship. So that's number one. I think there are going to be, on the other end of it, there are going to be places where you can speak confidentially and openly. Obviously, therapists, clergy, but also they're going to be, and in your peak group, if you're in a peak group, I mean, we have very strict instructions about confidentiality. You can speak openly there. And there are going to be some friends that you can talk with, that you can trust that information is going to be, held sacredly, if you will. And then there's going to be a bunch of folks in the middle. And that's where it becomes, I think, challenging, where there are people, they may be acquaintances, they may be people that in an organization, a service organization or whatever, they may ask you. And I think I think sometimes it's permissible for you to totally avoid the question if you need to, and in terms of saying, I believe they're doing fine. My daughter's an attorney and I'm, keeping busy. I think there are other times where you can say, we haven't spoken for a while. It's been a while since we've had a conversation. And I have hope that we can, talk more soon. And that's an honest statement. You haven't spoken for a while. You have hope. You have hope for the future. So you talk about it in a measured way. There are going to be other situations, I think, where you may have an opportunity to educate people about estrangement. And I am in a situation where I have a child that's not talking to me right now. And you know what I've discovered? That's happening to a lot of us. And so it provides an opportunity to educate folks that you are in some relationship with about estrangement. And it's not only an opportunity to educate them, it may be an invitation for them to share something that's happening in their life or someone that they know.
Yes.
I have a really good friend who I have a lot of respect for. He's in a pretty significant position in a denomination. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't shared with him anything about the estrangement because I'm afraid of what he'll think of me. Just recently I did. And he said, that's funny you shared that. And then he shared his story.
Yeah. So
there are going to be situations where we may take a little bit of risk in talking about it to educate folks or to invite a conversation, something that's, if not happening to them personally, often to somebody that they know.
Yes. So
I think there's this spectrum, of places where we just don't talk about it at all on social media. Very protective. We don't want names mentioned. We don't want people talking about personal details of our lives online in a way that we lose control of and that would be hurtful, further hurt to the relationship. The other end is folks, that we can talk freely to with confidence, that it will go no further. And then there's that middle where we have to be discerning, where there may be some risk that we take to take it in a way that this is an opportunity for me to get the message out.
Yeah. Yeah. So we touching on this piece about sort of honoring boundaries and boundaries that have you're either putting in place because you're trying to protect the relationship even as weakened as it is, because you want to preserve opportunity to reconcile, or at least throw less gasoline on the fire.
Right.
And I know from the work that we do that we're focused on the estranged parent. There is another part of this, that's the estranged child. And although, we're not specifically looking at that group as a recovery group, they're hurting too. I've heard you say that. Do you have anything that you would like to say about the children who are estranging their parents?
Yeah, I think just reemphasizing what you just said, Kelly, again, they're hurting too. And I think the research indicates that as well. So we're dealing with hurt on both sides. Everybody hurts, the song says. And I would want estranged children, adult children, to know that as leaders in Peak, we recognize that. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say is we want to make sure that they understand that to the best of our ability, we are working to avoid establishing blame. That our work is about establishing blame, and I do see or hear about a few things online that concern me about that, where you have websites about toxic parents, and then you have dueling websites about toxic children.
Yes.
That really is disturbing to me. And I guess I would want parents and children and adult children to know that from the standpoint of Peak, that's not what we're about. We're not about establishing blame. And my best way of thinking about this is back to the car accident analogy, that when there's a car accident and people are injured and the emergency personnel come, they don't ask whose fault this was before they treat them.
That's true.
It's like he deserves to recover.
Yeah.
That's kind of become my new mantra.
Yeah.
Everybody deserves to recover. And of course, we hope that reconciliation is a part of that recovery process. But if it's delayed, parents deserve to recover. Children deserve to recover. And I guess I would want adult children to know that from the standpoint of Peak and its leadership, that's our perspective. It's not who's to blame here. It's how do we help folks recover, because everyone deserves that.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that probably surprised you the most when we first talked about this over a year ago now, I think, was that I was on the same page with you as far as there's no blame in this. It's really the interaction, and it's the relationship itself that's suffering. So I'm on the same page with that for sure.
Yeah.
I would, I'm wondering if you could say just a little bit about the sorts of estrangements that we're not talking about, the abuse and that sort of thing. You want to say anything at all about that sort of estrangement?
You mean estrangement where there's been the ongoing threat of abuse of one kind or another?
Or substance abuse or those sorts of things.
I'm going to have to stop here, Kelly.
Okay.
I kind of lost track of where I am.
We're almost to the last question. And I was, the feeling that I'm getting when I watch these other videos is that some of the anger that I'm hearing on there is coming from people who have suffered abuse, neglect, abandonment sort of issues, where that clearly happens as a child, and it's clearly the parents' within their power to
Right,
not
right.
them. If you don't think this is a place for it, we can address it in another spot. I just can see a lot of feedback that might come back. Well, my father beat me until I was 17 and finally got out of the house. And if you think I can, whatever. Or if you want to do something separate on that.
Let me think about it here. Right here a minute. Let me give that a little bit of thought.
Sure.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, very good. Excuse me. Faye, is there any sort of estrangement that you would say that we would have to look at differently than through a different lens, maybe, than what we've been talking about?
Well, I think that there are certainly situations in which there has been such damage done in the past, children that, grew up in homes where they were physically or sexually abused or neglected, where any thought of recovery or of reconciliation would be just re-traumatizing to them. Now, you're the expert. You're the expert on that, Kelly, and I think that decision would need to be made with a therapist in terms of, what can that person deal with in terms of a process like this. On the other hand, I think from the other side, I would say the same thing. We do have situations where parents are physically abused, financially taken advantage of by adult children.
Mhm.
And there are, in that situation too, there has to be a clear understanding that that establishing some pretty strong boundaries that don't include reconciliation need to be a part of that. People need to be protected. So safety is really at one of the most highest priority in terms of any kind of reestablishing, certainly a reconciliation. I think that's why the recovery process is so important. And we may have in any peak group an adult that or a parent that, given their past experience with their child, it would be really inappropriate for to really pursue a conversation about reconciliation.
Mm.
They need to go through a process, and this is a process we invite every parent to go through, of doing a kind of relational audit.
Mm.
To kind of take a look at my life and how have I contributed to the estrangement and to other kind of difficulties in relationships, so that I can own those. And that's an important part of the recovery process too, is becoming more self-aware. And, but I would continue to say that they deserve to recover. And whether they ever are able to reconcile with their children or not, I still want them to be treated with respect and with some faith that if they go through a process of learning and growing, that their life can be better than it would be if they had not done that.
I would totally agree with that as well. There's nothing to be lost by going through the recovery process, just everything to be gained. And that's really important for people to recognize, I'm sure. It's changed.
Yeah. And I think it's hard, especially in those situations where as a parent, you may intuit, given the past, that this may be, when we talk about reconciliation is delayed, it may be delayed past this life. It may not get solved in this lifetime. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for folks dealing with acceptance is recognize that sometimes that happens. But given my particular faith orientation, as part of why I think a spiritual dimension is so important, I think reconciliation beyond death is also something that we can hope for.
Yes.
So I think about Peter's denial of Jesus. That wasn't reconciled until after the resurrection.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are going to be reconciliations that are delayed until a life to come. And I really believe that. So I think I have two hopes. Hope is in what might happen within this time frame. Hope for myself in terms of my recovery process. Hope in terms of how that might lead to reconciliation in this life. But also have a hope beyond that reconciliation is ultimately the destiny of all of us.
Yes. Wonderful. I love that point of view. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So as we sort of try to tie this up, what do you see as the future of Peak?
Yeah, I'm really excited about Peak and its future. If you kind of back up to 10,000 or however many feet we talk about when we talk that way, there are a lot of estranged relationships in the United States now. Somebody said 27% of adults now have an estranged family member. Wow, that's 56 million people that are estranged, and they're not all going to be quickly repaired or reconciled. How do we help people live in that state in as healthy a way as we can, and in a way that helps them grow and develop to make reconciliation more likely, and when it does happen, more sustainable?
Yes.
So I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people who are, feel us called to helping people live in the best way they can, the best version of themselves they can, when there are people who don't want to be in relationship. How do you do that? I think it's a great opportunity. So, and then I think of that 56 million, there are 5 to 10 million estranged parent adult child relationships. So I think it's huge. This is of the same order of magnitude as the number of folks dealing with drug alcohol use disorders. It's about 20 million. So and what do we do in those situations? Well, we have all kinds of recovery groups, right? We have AA, we have Nar-Anon, we have Al-Anon, we have Adult Children of Alcoholic Recovery Group. I think we need recovery support systems nationwide. I think that's going to include support groups that are akin to these other kinds of cousins of people, things that people are recovering from. I think training a critical mass of caregivers so they can begin to shift the culture in the direction of recovery. We're not going to get to train everyone, but we don't have to. We just need to, it's a movement, right? As you said at the beginning, we just need a critical mass to begin to get things going. And I see that beginning. I see that beginning in your work too, Kelly, and that's exciting. I think expanding online and print resources, the kind of, we've got a couple of books now out there. We have another very important work coming from you. This channel that you're creating for online resources for people, I think that's going to be really important and really helpful. So I think this goes far beyond me. I'm 71 years old, so I'm not going to be doing this forever. It goes far beyond me, and I'm excited to see that that this important work is going to go forward, and I think make a real contribution to the quality of life that we have in this society.
Wow. Well, thank you for your time today, Fe, and it's just so inspiring. I'm sure other parents who have been estranged to know that you have been through this, that you've come forward and tried to turn it into something that would be helpful for other people while you work on your own recovery, will be massively important. And I'm looking forward to the wave that comes in the movement. I'm really excited for that, because if it can help even a small portion of those 5 to 10 million people, it will be that many more people who are working towards healthier, happier lifestyles, even while they're hoping for reconciliation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Kelly. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Fe again for the time he spent making these 2 videos. If you found them helpful, or if you think they will help anyone else, please feel free to share. You can also help other people. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. This way you will be notified every time we upload a new video, and you'll be able to get to it quickly. Thank you.